I have a lot of pink art supplies, and by a lot I mean a lot. And today I'm gonna take all of them and make some art, and it's gonna be a long one. First thing that I had to do was to swatch all the supplies. A lot of them are older, things that I've had laying around for years that I just forgot about or don't use very often. And as you can see during the swatching, one of the markers had dried out because the cap wasn't on properly and it turned this horrible shade of yellow. I do try to rehydrate it and it does work to some degree, but overall it was a lot of swatching. It took a couple of hours to swatch all of these. Some of the supplies are things that I bought myself, some are things that were gifted to me, some came from subscription boxes, and like you'll see with the Ohuhus, they all came from one set. And those were a lot to deal with. There is also another section of these art supplies. Some of them I made myself. There are a couple of watercolors in here that I recently started to make, and I figured I may as well use them. So the final count on art supplies is 92, which is a lot to deal with, and trying to fit them all into one piece is not going to be easy, but I'm going to try. Now, I spared you guys the sketching process because I am the world's slowest sketcher, so I was trying to think what things are pink, and the things I could think of are princesses, sunsets, and flowers. And I decided, why not throw all of those into one piece? So I came up with this cute sketch that I like, and I'll be transferring it on over to a bigger piece of paper here soon. The hard part is going to be a lot of these colors, as you can see, are very similar, so I'm going to have to try and figure out how to use them in different ways. The first thing I'm doing is sketching with this Prismacolor Coal Erase pencil. The second thing I'm using is a Prismacolor pencil in a peachy color, and I'm just going to be going over the skin with just a very light layer, and I'll be layering a lot more on top of that. Next up is this marker that I got from a Scrawler box. It's an Ecoline liquid watercolor marker. I chose a very thick piece of paper for this because there's a lot of mixed media to go through, and I know these things eat through the paper. Next up is a distress marker in the color Tattered Rose, and I'm doing a little bit of shading on the skin with this. It is water-based, so if worst comes to worst, I can always blend it out later with water, but I'm just laying down where I want shadows to be. Next up is another Prismacolor colored pencil in the color Blush Pink, and I'm just kind of blending around the skin, adding some more depth to that previous colored pencil. And I'm smoothing out some of the harsh lines of the distress marker with a little bit of water and a paintbrush. Now I've got a very weird art supply to hold. This is the Stabilo highlighter, and I bought a pack of these for doing bullet journals, and they're a little awkward to hold, so I don't use them very much, and I'm just laying down the base layer for the dress. Part of why I do like this one a lot is because it's a highlighter, but it's not super bright. Next up is a Copic multiliner, and this is a pink one, and I'm just doing some very gentle outlines on the face and hair, and I'll definitely be going over everything later. Then I grabbed this Art and Fly marker, and I realized it was too dark too soon, and I panicked and I put it back, and I grabbed something else instead. This is going to be a Progresso woodless pencil in the color Carmine. These are really cool because the entire pencil is pigment, but these spray really, really easily. So this one's short, not because of use, but because it broke in my pencil pouch. And then I've got the first of many alcohol markers. This is a Copics in the color Sardonic, and it's just a really nice pale pink. And so I'm blending into the hair a little bit and just starting to build up some of the form and some of the color, some of the contrast. And this is actually a newer acquisition for me, and I really love this color a lot. And then I also added a little bit of blush and some of the makeup. Then we're moving into the Blick Studio marker. This one is in the color Peach. Like I said, if it's a new media for me, I'll usually pick a pink one because I will always have a use for a pink art supply, even if it doesn't perform how I want it to. And unfortunately, these Blick markers do fall into that category. They're really nice and juicy and smooth, but the nibs are very soft. Next up is a Zig Brushable. This one is just a pink one, and I did a little bit more blending on the dress, blended out a little bit more of the hair. And then I moved on to this Crayola marker in the color pink, and like with an earlier art supply, I figure if this goes wrong, I can just dollop some water on it and call it a day. And I'm starting to add in where I want some of the flowers to be in her hair. Since I decided that I wanted her to be in a giant field of flowers at sunset, I figured it would look good if she had a bunch of flowers in her hair. She's going to be holding a huge bouquet of them later. This is actually one of my homemade watercolors. It was actually made with eyeshadow pigment, so it is really glittery, and this is going to be the base of my sky. So I'm adding in a couple of big clouds here and going a little bit overboard because I really love watercolor. And then I also started laying down where I wanted the flower field to be as well. I do regret this a little bit later because I could have added more supplies there. And now we're beginning the Parade of Ohuhus. As you can see, this one has a little bit of a mishap. It's got some gunk on it, and it's in the color either 6 or 9, and I'm not really sure which. I'm gonna say 6 for this, and I just started adding a few more roses to the hair. Next up is another Copic, and this one is in the color Fuchsia, and for this I'm coloring in her eyes, some roses, and adding a little bit of a pattern to the top of her dress. This is a marker not often used by me because it is so dark, but it is a really pretty color. I have another Ohuhu in the color 87. I based this dress kind of off of an old Dior one where they have these really pretty bustles. I didn't quite get it right, but I used it as the outline for her bustle. I grabbed another Copic since I was already working with so many alcohol markers. I figured I may as well just keep going. So I'm using a Copic in the color Dark Heat, and I'm just kind of blending out a little bit of that really dark Ohuhu marker. Next, I've got an Ohuhu again in the color 87, and I'm adding some details to the roses. Then I'm quickly grabbing that Cool Erase pencil again, and I'm just blocking in where I want the hands to be, and I'm just laying down the general area where the bouquet is going to be. This is a mapped pen in the color pink, and I'm doing a little bit of line art with this. This is another thing that I'd bought for bullet journaling, and it didn't quite work how I had hoped it would, but it is a really nice pen. It's just a little awkward to hold because it's a triangle shape, and I'm just outlining the face, the hair, the arms. This is actually a house paint, and it's just a dusty pink, and I bought it for a different purpose other than painting my house. And I'm using it to lay down the base for a couple of flowers and some of the base for a few more clouds. And since I have my paint out, this is an Americana acrylic in the color Baby Pink, and like with the other paint, I'm adding in some more flower bases and trying to figure out how I want the bouquet to look and how full I want it to be. Next up is another watercolor that I made, and I'm filling in some of that skirt area. It's also getting used in the sky. I'm just trying to make a bridge between some of those really dark colors and some of the empty spot, and just adding a little bit more clouds here and there to bring a little bit more depth to the background. Now for one of my not so favorite art supplies, these are some old oil pastels that I've had hanging around for a while. One's in a lighter peach, one's in a darker peach, and these I'm just adding to the skin and blending out a little bit. I didn't quite think ahead, and as I'm blending out the skin, I realized I don't know if any of my supplies are gonna stick on top of these, and that's gonna have to be dealt with later. This is another watercolor. This is a really pretty quinacridone magenta by Daniel Smith, and I like to use this one a lot for adding shadows. It's just a really rich color, and I'm adding it to the sky, and I'm also adding it for some more depth for the background flower area. Next up is a Zig Clean color in the color Geranium Red, and this one I'm going to be using to add some more details to the flowers. I'm also doing a little bit of shade, a little bit of detail as well on her dress. I really like these pens. I only have 2 of them, but I really like them in part because they have such a fine tip, so you can get a lot of detail with them. This is a touch marker in the color Cosmos, and I'm working on the bustle a little bit more with this, just trying so hard to make it work, and adding a little bit of outlining on the skirt as well. This is an alcohol marker. They're very cheap alcohol markers. I'd got it in hopes that it could be like a Copic, but with the bullet nib, it's pretty similar. It's pretty similar to almost every other bullet tip alcohol marker out there. I did try to use this over top of the oil pastel, and I added a little bit of blush to her cheeks, and upon realizing that apparently alcohol marker sticks on top of pastels, I added a little bit more shading to her arms as well. This is another homemade watercolor. It is a duochrome, so it kind of shifts between orange and pink, and I'm adding that into the sky as well. And at this point, I'm just trying to find places to shove the rest of these art supplies. It doesn't really pick up super good on the camera, but it shimmers quite a lot. And now, the first of many. This is an Ohuhu marker that came in a giant set. I've got like 6 of these, and I'm just adding this one to the sky with the intention of eventually blending it out with water to make it more of a watercolor. I've also got this same type of Ohuhu in more of a berry color, and I'm doing the exact same thing, adding a bit more texture to the foreground, blocking in where I want some of the roses to be as well, and then blending it out with water. The Ohuhu parade continues. This is one in more of a salmon color, doing the exact same thing, adding flowers to the flower field, blending it out with water. Now for something different, just a basic Crayola crayon in the color Red Violet, and I'm trying to add a little bit of shading to her hair, her skin. I didn't want to go too crazy with it, just in case it acted weird. Started to define where I want more of the rose shapes to be, and I laid down a block of it in the sky. I'm not pushing super hard because I don't want it to cover everything. I'm just trying to get rid of some of this big empty blank space. This is a Copic Chow in the color Rose Pink, and it's very pale, and I'm adding it again to the floral field and adding it to her dress. Because the skirt of her dress, I wanted it to stay really pale. I have to be very particular with what supplies I use, because a lot of these can tend to get pretty dark. I'm also starting to add a little bit of shading to her skin after realizing that apparently alcohol markers sticks to wax media. This is another Copic Chow in the color Light Pink. These 2 colors are very similar in this video, but they are a lot more different looking in real life. And I'm just adding a few more lines to the dress, and I'm adding some shading to the sky. Another Copic Chow. This one is in the color Rose Red, and I am adding this to the flower field. And then another Copic in the color Baby Blossoms. I'm adding a little bit more shading with this, and I'm also adding more detail to the flowers. This one is a really nice marker because it's one of the few I have that's more of a muted tone. A lot of the ones I have are more bright, and since this one's muted, it works really good for adding in shadows. And I'm just still amazed that alcohol markers work on top of wax medias. I think that was probably the biggest discovery of the entire video. This is an oil pastel in the color Pale Vermilion, and I'm just starting to layer it on top of the skin and add a little bit more depth to it before blending it out. I've got a couple of different things going on at once. I just put them all in one palette because I didn't want to keep bringing them out. There's a couple acrylic washes on here. There's a Cosmos pink and an opera pink, a pale lilac. It's a color that I never know how to class it as because a lot of times in certain lights it looks a little like a pale purple, in other lights it looks like a pale pink, and so I'm using it as a pale pink to also brighten up some areas. I don't have a lot of opaque light pink supplies, so I'm just trying to use it when and where I can. And then I'm going in with one of the darker colors to add a little bit more detail to the roses. And most of these are acrylic wash from Holbein, but there are a couple, like the one in the top right corner is one from the world's cheapest gouache set that I got years ago. Deciding that I absolutely hated how the bustle was turning out, I took one of those medium pinks and covered over the area I didn't like, discovered that I had incorrectly colored a piece of hair, so I also recolored that area with the paint, and then I just started adding more details here and there to the sky, to the plants. This is 5 colors in one shot, basically. For the bouquet, I knew that I didn't want to have to meticulously paint every single petal, so I'm just globbing paint on and blending it out and just hoping at some point it looks like a flower. This is a very glittery Copic marker. It is a Copic Spica, and it is super glittery and very pink, and it does not show up in 90% of lightings. These are what I like to call budget crayons. These are the Play School brand. You get them at the dollar store. This one's in red violet. They do not have a very high pigment to wax ratio, so they're not opaque. So I'm just adding some shadow to the flowers, shadows to the sky, shadow to the dress. Moving on to the next one in the color Peach, doing the same kind of thing with it. I wasn't too afraid of these because it took so many passes to start building up the pigment that I didn't have a fear of making it too dark and then not having a way to go back and lighten it. I'm pushing pretty hard and going over some spots a lot, and not a lot's changing. And this is another example of I bought a box of supplies and it came with 5 of these. Next up is another Play School crayon, and it's just in the color pink. Same thing, flower field, sky, press a lot, hope for the best. Play School again, in the color melon. This one's actually more of an orangey tone, and so I decided that it needed to go up in the sky, and I'm pressing really hard with it because I wanted to have a darker pink cloud. This is another Play School in the color Orchid this time, and I'm still working on that same part of the flower field. Another Play School marker. This is the last one, thankfully, of the Play Schools, and it's just in the color Carnation. Same thing again, flower field, sky. And this should be my last crayon I have to play with. This is by Crayola, and it's in Carnation Pink. And I just want to say, I have a Crayola box and the Play School box the same size. Crayola only gave me 2 crayons that I would consider pink, whereas Play School gave me 5. So, Crayola, what are you doing? This is an Ohuhu in the color 86, and I'm starting to add some details to those flowers. This is one of my more favorite colors. I just don't have a lot of supplies with this color because it's so dark I never know how to use it. It's just one of those really pretty Bordeaux wine colors. You saw me pull it out earlier. The Art and Fly makes its return. This is 7RP. It's pink. Very similar with the last supply. I'm just adding some details to the flowers, adding some details to the flower field behind it. I am glad that I didn't do what I had intended originally. Originally, I was just going to use all of the alcohol markers on the skin and call it a day, and I'm glad that I waited and mixed them in at the end because I think it made for a lot stronger piece. Next up is surprise, another Ohuhu, this one in the color 28, and I'm adding more flowers. Next up is another Copic Chow in the color peach, and I'm adding flowers and some details to the clouds. Towards this point, it was definitely feeling a little bit superfluous to have so many supplies, so I'm just trying to add things in wherever the paper will take them. Ohuhu again in the color 12, same thing, doing the flowers. Another Ohuhu in the color 8, more flowers, more clouds. This is definitely an example of I bought a pack of supplies and it just came with a lot of one color. These are from the Ohuhu marker set. I believe this is the 40 pack. Now for the color 10, since it's a darker tone, I'm adding some details to the flowers, and then I'll add some more flowers in the background again, and a little bit more of the sky. I basically bought the pack of Ohuhus. It's a really good pack. It comes with a whole bunch of colors. For better or worse though, there's a lot of pink included in here. Ohuhu in the color 5, and I'm doing more flowers, and then I start adding a little bit of shading to her dress. Moving on to an Ohuhu in the color 17, and I'm focusing a little bit more on the sky. I'm trying to bring some of that dark, moody clouds a little bit further to the center, and then of course I add some more flowers to the background. I don't normally use the chisel tip on markers, it's not my favorite, and I did find that it made a really nice stamp for adding the flowers. Ohuhu again! This one I'm going to say is the color 9, not to be confused with the color 6 that I used earlier, and again, using it on the sky, using it on the flowers. Next up is a trio. These are 3 chalk pastels that I really wish that I had just forgotten about, and oh, I didn't find those when I was cleaning my room. I don't like chalk pastels. They are messy and they dry out my hands, and at one point they were my favorite media, but those days are long gone. Because these are kind of opaque though, I'm using them for the sky and for the clouds, and I'm trying to soften the edges of some of the clouds and hopefully blend it into the background a little bit better. This is my other Zig clean color, and this is in the color Peach Pink, and I'm adding a little bit more shading to the hair, and I'm adding a little bit more shading to her bouquet. This is my last oil pastel, I believe, and it's just kind of a medium pink, and I'm just adding a little shading here and there. These are 2 more of those mapped markers. I'm taking the darker one and doing a little bit more outline work on the hair, since a few of those outlines had gotten lost over time. And I'm using the lighter one to just add a little bit more details here and there. Next up are these colored pencils from Stettler. I didn't know what to do with, so that's kind of why I waited until the end. I'm just adding them to the sky and to the back of the flower field, and I'm just hoping that they will blend out any harsh edges that I might have left behind. And then I'm also trying to add a little bit of shading to her face. I usually can add some colored pencil on top of Copic, so I'm hoping that this will do the same. This is a peach colored watercolor pencil by Fantasia. I have honestly had these since high school. Watercolor pencils used to be my favorite medium. I'm adding it to the sky and then blending it out with a little bit of water. This is also another Fantasia one from the same set. It's just a darker reddish pink color. And I'm hoping that this adds a little bit of contrast between the clouds. And here's the rest of the family from that one Ohuhu pat. These ones are just going to go for the sky and for the flowers for almost the entire set. I honestly didn't realize there were this many pink ones in the pack until I got to this point in the art. They're water-based, so again, I can always take some water to them and blend them out. But I'm just trying to add a little bit of texture and shadow here and there. So I added more flowers to her hair, I added a couple of petals swirling around, trying to give it more of that princess feeling. And then with this last one, I did just a little bit more shading to the bottom of her dress. Finally, moving on to something else. This is a distress marker again. This one is in the color Victorian Velvet. This is actually the one earlier that was that horrible yellow tone, but I was able to rehydrate it and I decided to use it for a little bit more outlining on her hair, mostly because this is a really dark supply. This is another distress marker. This one is in the color Abandoned Coral, and I thought it would be nice to use it more as a watercolor. So I put some of it in one of the empty wells of my palette, and then I went over it with water and turned it into a nice light watercolor. The sky was starting to look a little bit dark, and I was hoping this would add a pop of brightness to it. I also blended out some of those newly added flowers to her hair just to make them a little more soft. Next up is a handful of Copic markers. These are in the colors RV32, RV4, and RV11, and I'm adding some more clouds to the sky and some more flowers to the background. This is a highlighter I found in the deep dark depths of my room, and I'm just adding a little bit here and there to the sky. This is an acrylic paint in the color English Rose, and I purposefully saved a few opaque supplies for the end. I decided that I wanted her bouquet to be a little more grand, so I used this to block in some more flowers in her bouquet, and I added a couple to the background as well. Then I grabbed this pale pink apple barrel paint. I used that to add a little bit more detail to the roses that I just added, and I blended the sky a little bit with it as well. This is a Sharpie, and it's a very, very bright pink, and it does not pick up that well on film, but trust me, it's vibrant. So I didn't want to have too many areas that are super bright, so I tried to use it sparingly, and I use it around some of the flowers and a little bit in the sky. This is actually another highlighter, and contrary to popular belief, it's actually a different color than the other highlighter I just used, and very similar to that bright Sharpie, I didn't want to have a lot of it, so I tried to use it sparingly in the sky and in the background. This is just a basic Prismacolor pencil in the color magenta, and I'm adding a little bit of shading to her face and a little bit of shading to her dress. Again, I didn't want her dress to be super dark, so I'm trying to be light-handed with this. Since I didn't make a rule that I had to use the supplies only once, I'm going back in with that pale lilac color and I'm adding a little bit of detail to the flowers. This is another watercolor I made. It's made with the Stuart Semple Pinkest Pink pigment, and as a result, it is also very bright and intense, so I watered it down quite a bit, and I'm just adding it into the sky, and then I decided to go back in with a little bit more of that pale lilac. This is actually a Signo gel pen that I have had since middle school. I remember getting this thing when I was in like 6th or 7th grade, and I thought it was so cool because it had so much glitter in it. I'm trying to use it sparingly, so I'm just adding a few pops of glitter to the flowers. This is another Sharpie in the color Berry. Because it's the last art supply I have that is dark, I'm finalizing some outlines on her skin, on her hair, on the dress. These last two are my Posca pens, and I am adding them to the bouquet to fix some of the flowers I messed up earlier and to make the part of her bouquet I added later a little bit more cohesive. And then I also went around and added it to the sky, added it to the flowers, added it to her hair, added a little bit of highlight with this lighter one. I was trying very hard to use everything, and I was so tired of drawing at this point. This took over 9 hours to draw, and I believe I spent 3 hours alone on the swatching, so I was very, very, very happy to be near the finish line. Now, since I had used all of my supplies and I had some paint left over in my palette, I didn't want to waste it even though it was just a little bit. So I just kind of go in with some paints again and just clean up some areas I might not be very happy with, add a few more highlights, a few more details, and I call it a day. I let everything dry and then I slowly peeled off my pink washi tape that I had put down to keep my paper from buckling on me. There's very few things as satisfying as that crisp white line at the end of a painting. Overall, I think this was a lot of fun to do. I definitely enjoyed myself, but having to come to terms with the fact that I have over 90 unique pink art supplies was a lot to deal with. But I personally had a lot of fun, and I do want to do more of these. I have one planned to do with yellow next, because I don't have that many yellow art supplies, so it should be a lot easier on my brain. I hope you all have a good evening, and I will see you next time. Bye!